Good afternoon. I'm Mike Nichols. Welcome to the PMOPA webinar, focusing this time on hypoxia. Today, we are pleased to have Scott Ashton. Scott is the CEO and Oxy evangelist for AirOx, and he's a frequent presenter on the topic of hypoxia. Scott's a FAST team representative and a CFII, and one day he'll have a PA-46. Right now, he's flying a Mooney, but he does get to fly right seat on occasion in an M600 with a friend of his down in Florida where he's based. One of the great things about today's webinar is that we're going to be able to offer wings credit for participants. At the end of Scott's presentation, if you would like to have wings credit, please stay for the quiz and participate in the quiz, answering the questions, including your wings credit email address associated with your account. So make sure you have that ready. So Scott, thank you very much for taking time to educate us today on hypoxia. And I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, thanks a lot for having me. I really appreciate it. And it's a topic I love talking about. The title of the presentation is Everything Your Flight Instructor Never Taught You About Using Aviation Oxygen. And we'll talk in a couple of slides why it's called that. But basically, what we're going to learn today is the answers to all of the questions that we get asked at all of the trade show booths that we go to, whether it's Oshkosh or Sun and Fun, questions that we get asked here. So it's a very practical application of everything that we get asked, and we try to answer all of your questions about using aviation oxygen, why you should use it, how to get your cylinders refilled, etc. A little bit about me, as Mike said, I do own a Mooney 201. That's my airplane sitting there at Naples Airport. I've coined the term Oxy evangelist because that's what we do here at AirOx. I'm a fast team rep, flight instructor with a couple of ratings, ATP. Helicopter, glider, seaplane, and of course, owner of a 201, and always got my eye on that M350. So I promise today we're not going to have any equations, chemistry, medical terms. I'm not a doctor. We're not going to talk about hemoglobin and all of that stuff. We're going to talk about very practical application of what we as pilots need to know about using aviation oxygen. So first thing we're going to talk a little bit about is hypoxia. And then obviously, since this is geared towards owners and operators of more pressurized aircraft, why should you care about hypoxia? Your M350 is pressurized. Why do I care? Second thing is we're going to learn about portable and installed oxygen systems, all of the different components. What do I need to know to maintain it? It can be a little overwhelming the first time that you try to pick everything and what connectors do I need and all that. We're going to break all of that down and simplify it. The third thing is why won't my local dive shop fill my cylinder? That's going to be more on the maintenance side. How do I get my cylinders filled? How do I get my aircraft oxygen system filled? And again, very practical application of things that we do here at AirOx for our customers. So what does hypoxia sound like? If this is a slow depressurization event in Lear 35, Coletta 66. It's a pretty well-known event that happened many years ago, back in the 80s. The gentleman that you're going to hear is a big burly guy. I've seen pictures of him. You'll hear his voice, how he sounds with hypoxia, and it's pretty startling. But I think it's a great example of what happens when we have a hypoxic event and why it's so dangerous and so insidious. I'm gonna kind of bring it fast forward it a little bit. We'll just hear the most.
Coletta 66, Cleveland out of here.
I'm just gonna bring it. So basically, he's declared an emergency. And he's asked for
Coletta 66. Are you able to maintain altitude?
The air traffic control is asking him, what's your situation?
What assistance can I give you other than that vector?
Altitude and what other assistance?
Unable to control altitude. Unable to control airspeed. Unable to control heading. Coletta 66. And that, everything A-OK.
Okay, Coletta 66, understand you're not able to control the aircraft. Is that correct?
That is.
So if you hear that, unable to control airspeed, unable to control altitude, unable to control heading, He knows his call sign. I don't even remember my tail number half the time, but he remembers his call sign, Coletta 66. And then he says, other than that, everything is A-OK. And then the air traffic controller confirms with him, you're unable to control the aircraft, and he says that's correct. So when pilots come up to our booth and they say, well, I can fly at 14,000 feet all the time. I don't experience any effects. I don't, I can do it. I don't need an oxygen system. This is exactly the reason why that's not true, because that's one of the symptoms of hypoxia, is this euphoria that you get where you're coherent enough to know that you're in trouble, but you're not coherent enough to know what the implication of that is. So this is a pretty striking example, and we're very lucky actually to have this on tape, because it does show exactly what it can do to you in that kind of a situation. The other thing to note was that his voice was very high pitched, right? Coletta 66. Well, later on, and I encourage you to Google Coletta hypoxia and listen to what happens after they get back down to a breathable altitude. This is a big guy with a deep voice. Sounds like a completely different person once they get back down to altitude. So very striking example of hypoxia. So everything your flight instructor didn't teach you about using aviation oxygen. What do we teach private pilots when they're getting their private pilot's license? The law of primacy, right? We teach oxygen's only required above 12,500 feet, right? So that's the first thing that student pilots, learner pilots learn about using aviation oxygen, is the requirements of oxygen use from 91 to 11, right? We all know what that is. If you're above 12.5 for more than 30 minutes, above 14,000 anytime, and at 15,000, each of your occupants has to be provided with aviation with onboard oxygen. So student pilots learn, they hear that oxygen is not necessary below 12,500 feet, and that they're safe going up to almost 14,000 feet for 30 minutes at a time. Right. The implication there is, hey, if I'm legal, I'm safe, right? That's what the aviation regulations are all about, right? Keeping us legal and keeping us safe. And in this case, we're going to learn that that's absolutely not true. And actually that 91-11 isn't bound in physiology, but in something completely different. So from COVID, we all know what SpO2 is now, right? It's on our watches. We used that during COVID as a measurement of our health. So this is a plot from the Flight Safety Foundation going back to the 80s. And this is borne by a lot of other data of SpO2 versus pressure altitude. So you can see at sea level, you're at, somewhere between 98 and 100% for a nominal healthy human being. As you go up in altitude, crossing that 8 to 10,000 foot mark, your SpO2 goes down below 90%, crosses that 90% threshold. Now, my daughter-in-law is a nurse. I've had physicians in the audience when I've given this presentation. At 90%, if you're in the hospital or you're at the doctor's office, they're going to put you on oxygen, because that tells them that something is wrong with your body and your body's not getting enough oxygen to feed the brain. So that happens not at 12.5, that happens at around 8 to 10,000 feet. And you can bear this out if you go up in your aircraft and the pressure altitude in the cabin is 8 to 10,000 feet, click off and see what your SpO2 is, and you'll find that it's generally somewhere in the 88 to 92% range, right? So up at 12,500 feet, just following that curve, your SpO2 is somewhere in the mid 80s. And at 14,000 feet, where you can be for almost 14,000 feet for up to 30 minutes, your SpO2 is in the low 80s. So, so 91-11, right? Those altitudes absolutely will not keep you safe, right? So you're in that danger zone anytime you're generally above 8,000 feet. Now, what's interesting is that Canada, EASA, and Part 135 all take that 12,500 foot altitude, bring it down to 10,000 feet. So you can be from 10,000 feet for 30 minutes, right? But if anything over 30 minutes, you need to use supplemental oxygen, right? So all that entire curve is shifted. So what's the difference between the physiology of pilots flying Part 91 in the US and flying anywhere throughout the world? Nowhere. Or nothing rather. So why do we have 12,500 feet here in the US? Well, it actually goes back to the Federal Register in the early 70s when 91-211 was put forward. A certain trade association of pilots and owners requested the 12.5 altitude because it would give pilots an additional westbound altitude where they could cross the Rockies with more ground clearance without having to use supplemental oxygen. And I understand the trade-off, right? Because if you don't have to use supplemental oxygen, you're more inclined to fly a little bit higher, give yourself a little bit more clearance over the mountains. So they felt that that was a safer trade-off. So that particular corner case that drove the regulations in the early 70s has been with us now for the last 50 years. And that's why we have 91-211 at 12.5 today. So kind of an interesting history of the regulation, and a real disconnect between the reason why we have the regulation, what it is, and the actual physiology of pilots. So it's kind of an interesting disconnect there. But 91-211 will not keep you safe. So what's interesting about hypoxia is that you don't have to have symptoms of it, right? That Coletto 66 audio that we just heard was a perfect example. But if you've landed from a long cross country and you've been up 8,000-10,000 feet and you land and you feel completely wiped out, you go home, you lay down on the couch, you've got a headache, you're driving home in a fog, chances are you've been experiencing some level of hypoxia. And if you're in that 90% range for 2 or 3 hours on a cross country, that's going to have a real impact on your health, on your decision making, and your general well-being. Fatigue is another big result of hypoxia. Factors that affect hypoxia susceptibility, exactly what you'd imagine. Age, the older you are, the more susceptible you are to hypoxia. Weight, if you're a smoker, if you're fatigued, you're going to be more susceptible to hypoxia. If you have OSA, you use a sleep apnea machine, more susceptible to hypoxia just because your body has a harder time bringing that oxygen into the bloodstream. On any particular flight, if you're stressed, if you're dehydrated, again, you're going to be more susceptible to hypoxia. So, hypoxia will affect you different ways on different flights, just based on the overall conditions of what you're experiencing as an individual. And it's also going to affect you differently from your passenger, from your co-pilot on any given flight. So they may be fine and you may be hypoxic, or vice versa. So it's one of those things where you really need to measure it in the moment. And fortunately, there's a lot of good ways to do that. The other thing to keep in mind, we were just talking here, one of my guys is going for a CFI and he says, oh, well, I'm down in Florida and, this doesn't really apply to me, which is interesting. But, if you're at sea level and you climb to 10,000 feet at 500 feet a minute, or 1,000 feet a minute, if you've got an M600, you're exposing your body to a critical altitude over a period of just 20 minutes with no time to adjust. So me living down here in Florida, when I go out to the mountains to go skiing, it takes me 2 days to get used to that altitude. And you're doing it over the period of 20 minutes, along with everything else going on, and expecting your body to adjust that. So, the effects of hypoxia don't necessarily need to be up at what we typically would classify as oxygen altitudes. It's definitely something to consider. So here's some research that goes all the way back to the 50s. So 8,000 to 10,000 feet, right? Normal cabin altitude in an airliner, cabin altitude in a pressurized Piper. If you're at that altitude for more than an hour, right? The SAE, Society of Automotive Engineers, in this table say detectable behavioral changes and complex cerebral functions begin to deteriorate. So shooting an approach, dealing with an emergency, dealing with busy airspace, all of those, yeah, they're complex cerebral functions. And so, the onset of hypoxia at altitudes even as low as 8,000 feet is going to have an impact on our performance as pilots. And of course, above 12,000 feet, not for 30 minutes, but for only 15 minutes, shows considerable performance decrements. So again, 91-211 will not keep you safe. And just for reference, an M600 cabin altitude at flight level 280, 9,400 feet, and an M350, 8,000 feet at flight level 250. So we actually sell a lot of portable oxygen systems, small kind of pony bottles, we call them, to owners of pressurized aircraft, because the cabin altitudes, if they really want to go up and get the maximum performance out of their aircraft, they will be at altitudes where they want to have supplemental oxygen on board, in addition to their emergency descent system. We'll talk about that separately. But this is just to keep them oxygenated throughout the flight. Now, how do we know what our individual oxygen system, symptoms are? This is a great way to do it. The hypoxia training using the PROTE, which is a portable reduced oxygen training enclosure, allows you to simulate the effects of hypoxia. They pump nitrogen into the air, which reduces the amount of oxygen to simulate going up to altitude without depressurization or anything like that. These have been at Oshkosh, Sun and Fun. They do private events. So we've got a altitude chamber event coming up. I saw that on the website, October 18th in Mesa. So I encourage you to go to the event, and I definitely encourage you to try the PROTE chamber. Because it's a great way to be able to know what your symptoms are. They take you up to 25,000 feet. You'll do math exercises. It's very simple. And the FAA even just changed the requirements. Used to be a third-class medical, and now you can do it with basic med, which is great. I'm a big advocate of that. So if you get the opportunity, absolutely take advantage of it. They'll probably be at Sun and Fun. They were definitely at Oshkosh. And we're actually trying to get them for our pals Skyhope fly-in up in Long Island in 2025 as well. So measuring hypoxia, which is done through a pulse oximeter. These have been kind of ubiquitous now, right? They're on your watches. The price of a pulse oximeter used to be $200 to $300. Now I think we've got them on our website for less than $50. This is really how you close the loop on your oxygen system and know that how your oxygen system is performing, right? So we can use the flows in our tables or whatever, or click the dial for whatever the system thinks we should be using. But on any given day, your oxygen requirements may be higher, may be lower. The only way to know that is measure exactly what your oxygen level is. And here, even on the Garmin watch, 1,100 meters, which is what, oh boy, I'm going to do math in real time. 3,000 or 4,000 feet, the 86% SpO2, which seems a little low. But anyway, take readings half an hour, every half hour. You can take them continuously, but every half an hour should be fine. Also, there are some limitations on pulse oximetry. So it operates by putting a light in through your skin and seeing what the reflectivity is. So if you've got your hand up on the glare shield and there's light coming in through the cabin, it will affect that reading. So I tend to put it on my finger, put it on my leg, underneath the instrument panel where it's nice and dark. Hold my hand still for about 30 seconds, and that's a good way to get a good reading. But no matter how you do it, whether it's a watch or a Fitbit or a pulse oximeter, you really need to have a way of measuring your pulse oximetry, and it really is a must in every flight bag. The other thing is not to forget about carbon monoxide. This is the Guardian carbon monoxide detector. That's got an active audio alert. Great for giving you an alert, and you really need something to hit you upside the head that you've got carbon monoxide. Don't don't ignore carbon monoxide. It's odorless, so don't depend on smelling the exhaust in the cabin. Sometimes you can if you're on the ground and you get some exhaust smell in, but don't depend on that. Also, don't rely on the black dot or any kind of passive detection. Like I said, you really need something to hit you upside the head with a very active alarm instead of just seeing something over on the other side of the panel, right? So, part 23.831, that's the aircraft certification requirement. They actually limit carbon monoxide ingress into the aircraft to 50 parts per million for certification. So something like the SensorCon, the AV8, where it gives you an actual readout is helpful. And if you've got carbon monoxide between 70 and 100 parts per million, you're going to start to feel the effects. You're going to feel a headache. You're going to feel fatigue. You're going to feel nausea. What's interesting is that some of those are actually the symptoms of hypoxia. But carbon monoxide and hypoxia actually operate very differently. So carbon monoxide fools your blood into thinking it's oxygen, right? Carbon monoxide is a carbon molecule and an oxygen molecule, or carbon atom and an oxygen atom, right? So that oxygen is there. So it makes your blood think that, hey, it's oxygen, it's good, I can use it. But what happens is it actually starts to suffocate. You start to feel like you're suffocating because you're not getting oxygen. You're actually getting carbon monoxide. High levels of carbon monoxide will also trick your pulse ox into reading high. So if you're flying up at 8,000 to 10,000 feet, you're a little hypoxic. You put your pulse oximeter on, and it's reading 98%. Now you've got a double problem. You're hypoxic, so you've got this euphoria issue going on, and you're actually suffocating yourself because you've got high levels of carbon monoxide. So you really need to have an active carbon monoxide detector in the cockpit. Now, if any of you are really, really paying attention, you'll notice in the lower right-hand corner, early on in the presentation, I switched that black dot passive carbon monoxide detector to black. And the reason is, as you're paying attention to what's going on elsewhere in the cockpit, if that thing's turns black, and there's no active alarm, you're not going to see it because you're paying attention to other things. So with all due respect to ASA and the producers of those, I really would not depend on one of those to, really to save your life. Invest in an active carbon monoxide detector. So that's gonna kind of wrap us up on the hypoxia portion of the presentation. Now we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of the different types of oxygen systems. So the first type is a chemical oxygen generator. Those are for emergency use. Typically give you between 15 and 20 minutes of pure oxygen. In the pipers, those are under the cabinets, in the passenger seat. Back in the passenger cabin or underneath the co-pilot seat for the crew. They're very hot. They're one-time use, and those are really just for an emergency descent. Those are also the same type of generators that you'll see in a passenger aircraft up in the overhead compartment for the passengers on the airliner. The second type is a liquid oxygen system. That's that green ball in the lower right. Those are typically for EMS, where they need a very large quantity of oxygen, but they also have the maintenance and personnel to be able to maintain it. They bleed off very quickly because it requires that the oxygen be kept very, very cold, minus 280 something. So in order to maintain it in that liquid state, but it's very dense and can produce a lot of oxygen in a period of time, but typically not anything you'll see in general business or commercial aviation. The next type is an installed oxygen system. Those you'll see like in a Saratoga, Turbo Saratoga, something like that. We sell them for a number of different aircraft. We've got the installed oxygen system on the Matrix, for example. Those are gaseous, and then portables, also gaseous. And then in the lower right, you see an oxygen generator. That's more of a military type. They do have some. I know Inogen makes an oxygen generator for general aviation use. Some good, some limitations on them, but we focus on the gaseous, as the oxygen generators tend to have, or oxygen concentrators tend to have a lot of maintenance and are very expensive. So I normally don't talk about pressurized aircraft. I normally talk to more general aviation pilots flying, Warriors, Archers, things like that. But let's talk about some pressurized aircraft considerations. So as I mentioned with the M600, you can still be hypoxic at cruise. If you're at flight level 260, the cabin altitude is going to be 9,400 feet. So we know, and we didn't really talk about night flying, but we know above 5,000 feet, your night vision is going to be affected because of the lack of oxygen going to your eyes, right? So if you're at flight level 250, 260, your cabin altitude's at 9,600 feet, you're gonna be affected by hypoxia, and it's going to affect your night vision. You've got an emergency descent system. Those are chemical generators. We also sell a lot of these little emergency pony bottles on the right-hand side, our EMT or our Pro 2. That gives you about 20 minutes of gaseous oxygen and allows you to make an emergency descent. So in the pressurized aircraft, it's really about getting down to a breathable altitude as soon as possible. You want something as simple as possible, something that you can don quickly. So if you've got stuff, in and around that drawer where it pulls out, you've really only got a minute or two to get things situated. At 250, you've got 3 to 6 minutes of useful consciousness and probably 1 to 2 minutes really to deal with the situation before it turns really problematic. The next issue is slow leaks, in your pressurization system. Are you going to be able to detect it? There's alarms and things like that, but, slow leaks, we know about Payne Stewart, we know about the Coletta 6.6. If you have a slow leak, pressurization leak in your aircraft, are you going to be able to detect it? Are you paying attention enough to be checking on your pressurization system? And if not, will you have the presence of mind to get that oxygen system on and get the aircraft down to a breathable altitude pretty quickly? And then maintenance, Kevlar cylinders, the carbon fiber cylinders that are in most of the modern aircraft now, those are good for 15 years, and then they need to be taken out of service. We'll talk a little bit about that when we talk about oxygen cylinders, but maintaining your oxygen system is extraordinarily important. The other thing that people bring up, both owners of pressurized aircraft and non-pressurized aircraft, is what I call O2 in a can. It's these little cans of oxygen that you breathe in, you put to your mouth and to kind of take a quick swill. I'm not a big fan of those. As a pilot, there's a lot of reasons you can't tell how much oxygen is in the can. The effect of the oxygen only lasts maybe 30 seconds, and then your body reverts right back to that hypoxic state. They're not refillable. They're only 95% oxygen, so it's not aviators breathing oxygen, or even the 99.9% oxygen if you use industrial oxygen. So even in an emergency, those really aren't going to do much for you. And if they're empty and you don't know it, then they're going to do even less for you, and probably be harmful because you're going to think that you have a solution when you really don't. So this is a portable oxygen system. Again, if you have a pressurized aircraft, probably not all that concerned about it, but an installed oxygen system is going to have a lot of the same components. So you've got a cylinder. Now these are called cylinders. They're not called tanks, and they're not called bottles. They're called cylinders. And the joke I like to use is tanks are for war, bottles are for babies, and cylinders are for oxygen. So we call those cylinders. The cylinders are typically in the 1,800 to 2,200 PSI range. So you need a regulator. That's that thing up on the top. That brings that 2,200 PSI gas that's in that cylinder down to a breathable pressure somewhere in the 20 to 50 PSI range. And it also, also maintains that flow as the cylinder pressure goes down. it maintains a constant flow. So it truly does regulate the flow of oxygen to the users. You've got some kind of a delivery device, cannula, mask, depending on the altitude that you're flying at, a flow meter or some kind of adjustment. We sell them where the adjustment is embedded in the regulator or separate. But, you know, these are really simple and easy to use. It can seem a little overwhelming when you're trying to pick one out, but once you get it installed and you're using it, it's very, very easy to use. So let's talk about cylinders, because we do get a lot of questions about this. So your cylinder size is going to be based on your duration and also your installation, how much room you have, whether it's installed in the cockpit, whether it's installed in the back of the aircraft. Kevlar cylinders can be 22 cubic foot, 50 cubic foot, and 115 cubic foot for the larger cylinders. The portable aluminum cylinders have an unlimited life. So we get calls from customers, hey, I just found an aluminum cylinder downstairs. It's, you know, tagged 2011. Can I continue to use it? Yes, you can. You just need a 5-year hydrostatic test before you fill it. So interesting thing, if you find that cylinder downstairs in the basement, it's obviously going to be out of hydro. If it's full of oxygen, what happens? Is the oxygen still good? It absolutely is still good. So what we tell people is use that cylinder, and then before you go fill it, then get it hydrostatic tested, because the hydrostatic test is only a requirement for filling. Now, that's different with the Kevlar and the steel cylinders. The steel cylinders and the Kevlar cylinders have a 15-year life for Kevlar, 24-year life for cylinders. Those cylinders need to be taken out of service at 15 years. So if you've got a matrix, we've got a program to replace those cylinders. There's no dispensation, and it's actually from the time that cylinder was produced, not installed on the aircraft. So it's important to make sure that your born on date for your Kevlar cylinder is within that 15-year lifespan to the month. Otherwise, that cylinder will have to be placarded and taken out of life, or out of service rather. If you've got a steel cylinder, that's still a 5-year hydro, and that's got a 24-year life. Some of the steel cylinders have an unlimited life, but check with us with the part number, and we can give you some guidance on that. All right. So on your cylinder, you're going to see a bunch of this stamping. So this one is M5659. 3AL, blah, blah, blah. There's a bunch of numbers on it, a bunch of codes. So we're going to decode this a little bit. So over on the left-hand side, you're going to start off with the DOT 3AL 2215. So DOT is obviously Department of Transportation. 3AL is the type of cylinder. So it's an aluminum cylinder. If it's a 3HT, it's a steel cylinder. So that gives you some indication as to how that cylinder was manufactured and what regulations it's produced under. 2215 or 2015 in this case is the nominal operating pressure. So some of them may be stamped 1800, some of them may be stamped 2015, some of them may be stamped 2215, depending on the nominal operating pressure of the cylinder. It can be confusing because you think 22, maybe that's the year of manufacturer, maybe 15 is the hydro date or something. No, 2215 is the operating pressure. Then there's a serial number. It's going to be a letter followed by 4 digits. Then this is the born on date here. So this is 03. The A22, A is actually the inspector symbol. So if you see 2 digits, that would be a month, 1 to 12, a symbol, and then a 2-digit year, that's the born on date. When they hydro it, they'll stamp that out. So you'll typically see that all stamped out, and then above it in big letters, you'll see, 0327 or whatever the new hydro date is. But that's where the hydro date is. It's 2 letters, or 2 numbers rather, a symbol, and 2 more numbers. So that's the important date that you want to look for. M is medical, O2 is oxygen, and then there, depending on the type of cylinder, there's some stamping on there for Transport Canada. So I've got one here. The born on date was, let's see, there's the operating pressure M. This is 119. You guys can't see it, but it's stamped 119 on mine, right next to the serial number. So that's how you read the oxygen cylinder. Now, what size cylinder do we pick? This is a duration chart. Other manufacturers have comparable duration charts. So basically, we recommend picking the largest cylinder on a portable that you can reasonably fit into the airplane. And the reason is when you go to get it filled, most places are going to charge you a fixed fee to fill it. They're not going to charge you by the volume of gas that you use. So the bigger the cylinder is, the fewer times you have to get it filled, the more convenient it's going to be, the less it's going to cost you per use, obviously. So we recommend an E&M cylinder, 22, 24 cubic foot. Like at 10,000 feet, it'll give you 46 man hours. So a good duration, a little bit bigger than this, or a little bit smaller rather. And you won't be filling it as often, which will save you money. Cannulas. So cannulas by regulation are allowed to be used up to 18,000 feet. That's the certification reference 231447 Bravo. The conserving cannula, all of the manufacturers of portable oxygen systems use the same CHAD conserving cannula. There's two different types. There's the mustache type and the pendant type. Those cut your oxygen use by about 75 to 80%. They've got a little bladder in there that absorbs oxygen as you're breathing out. And then when you breathe in, you get this nice big dose of oxygen as you're breathing in. Mechanical, no batteries, very easy to use. The next question we get asked a lot is how do you maintain these cannulas? Do not submerge them. Don't wash them. Don't rinse them. Don't get alcohol inside the cannulas themselves because there's capillaries. So if you get anything in there, now you run the risk of molding, getting a little bit of mildew in there or something. So if any of you have a CPAP where you rinse everything, you hit it with hot water, you want to treat these very different from that. You do not want to submerge them. So we recommend just using alcohol wipes on the exterior surfaces. Store them in the package so the lines don't get crimped or anything like that. Avoid heat and cold. So, don't store them in the airplane, throw them in your flight bag, bring them home with you, and then replace them after about 200 hours of use. Generally that's 2 to 3 years, depending on how much you're using it. But what happens is that it's medical grade vinyl for sterilization, and that will start to break down over a number of years. So the replacements aren't that expensive. Keep a couple in the back of the airplane or in your flight bag rather for your passengers, and replace them every 3 years, every 200 hours. Then we get to masks. So most of you are familiar with these. I think the M350 has something similar to these, where you're certified to 25 flight level 250 or below. There's different types of masks. We'll talk about that, but they can include a microphone. The other thing is that, if you're below the altitude where a mask is required, if you've got a passenger who's really stuffed up and really congested, you may want to throw the mask on to them just so that at least they can get some oxygen and they're breathing through their mouth. So the continuous flow masks on the left, those are limited to 25,000 feet. And again, there's the CFR reference, 231447 Charlie. So that's for cabin altitude up to 25,000 feet. If you're flying above 25,000 feet to 40,000 feet, you need to have on board a diluter demand mask. And that's either for continuous operation or emergency descent. Again, there's the reference, 1447 Delta this time. Those are certified to 40,000 feet, TSO approved. They've got an integrated microphone with an inflating harness. And then above 40,000 feet, the partial pressure of oxygen is so low that just breathing unpressurized oxygen won't force the oxygen into the bloodstream. So you actually have to breathe this oxygen under pressure. And if any of you are airline pilots or corporate jet pilots, you're very familiar with these pressure demand masks above 40,000 feet. So the next part, so we've talked about the cylinder, right? We've talked about the delivery device at your face, right? Either a mask or a cannula. The next part is, how do we regulate the flow? There's a couple of different ways to do that. So first thing you're going to do is, I like to close the loop based on pulse oximetry, right? That's the best way to do it, because really that's what you're trying to control, is how much oxygen is going to your brain. So there's a couple of ways to do it. You can manually control it with a needle valve, which is one of our systems, our AirOx system. So each user has their own metering valve. They can adjust the flow based on how they're feeling. The second system is a manual fixed regulator. So that's pre-metered for all users. Though that system's great if you have kids. You don't want them playing, let's make the ball go up and down, wasting a lot of oxygen. You want to set the oxygen to a certain flow rate based on an altitude. Everybody gets the same thing. It can't be tampered with. You're not going to worry about somebody using too much or too little. That's our SkyOx system. We sell that through Sporties and online. And then there's pulse, mechanical pulse and electrical pulse. Everybody's familiar with the Mountain High O2D2, which activates when you take a breath and then shuts off when you're not breathing, based on your inhalation. So a number of different ways to regulate the flow. But I think of, being an engineer, I think about it as a control loop. So however you control the flow at the onset, whether it's the needle valve, your regulator setting, you're gonna see what the flow is through a flow meter. That's your open loop portion, and then your closed loop portion is going to be through your SpO2, through your pulse oximeter. You're going to see what that is. If it's low, if it's high, you'll make an adjustment to your oxygen. We were flying back from Oshkosh. We were at 17,000 feet, and for some reason I had a heck of a time getting my my SpO2 up. Just crank it up a little bit, and got me back to where I needed to be. Used a little bit more oxygen, but you really want to be at that high 90 range so that you're at peak performance. So that's kind of how I think about setting the flow rate on your oxygen system. All right, another big question that we get asked all the time: what kind of connector do I have? So this is a chart of different connectors. Piper uses a lot of different connectors in their system. So the top one is a PB1, middle one is PB2. That's a Puritan 550 and a 750. Scott connectors are very popular. Those are the old Avox systems. Those are typically in Beechcraft and Mooney's. Beechcraft, Mooney's, and some of the early Pipers I think used Scott connectors. Our connector looks like a quick disconnect on a air compressor hose. Then there's the SkyOx fitting, which is also a military connector, and then the bottom one is the CPC connector. Those are used on the Cirruses. You see those in the upper overhead, but this chart is on our website, so we call it Identify My Connector. But there are a lot of different connectors, and there's actually 40 different type of connectors with mil-spec connectors and whatnot. But these are the primary civil connectors that are used in the industry. So next thing is installation. This is kind of a tricky one. We get a lot of questions, a lot of answers about this, about what can you do to install your oxygen system. So a couple of different things here. Number one, if you don't have an installed oxygen system, you really are not supposed to just buy these brackets, put them in the baggage compartment of your aircraft, take a couple sheet metal screws and attach it to the back of your aircraft. I've had people insist that they can do it as a minor alteration, and they do it all the time. And what I've had other people say, that's absolutely not allowed. So that's between you and your A&P, but whatever you do, make sure your installation is airworthy. Another thing that we get asked a lot is, people have older steel cylinders in their aircraft that they're heavy, right? A steel cylinder could be 25 pounds, Kevlar cylinder probably 10 to 12. Can they convert their old steel cylinder into a Kevlar cylinder? If it's not, don't forget, these are installed. So these are part of the IPC, instructions for continued airworthiness. So even though it fits, you can't just remove your steel cylinder and replace it with a Kevlar cylinder. They use a different fitting, first of all, so your regulator won't fit on, which brings you the next step on the road to hell, kind of, because now you say, okay, well, let me just get a regulator that fits with a Kevlar cylinder. And now you've got a cylinder regulator assembly that you're installing in your aircraft that's not approved for that aircraft. So work that out with your A&P. It's not as simple as just unbolting one and bolting in another one. If you've got a portable, we've got seat back cases that attach to the seat back, make it easy to install. But installation is one of those things that you really want to pay attention to. The number one thing that you don't want to do is you don't want to have that cylinder just laying down loose on your back seat, or I've seen them up on the glare shields. I've seen them on the passenger seat. If you hit turbulence, if you get into a loss of control of the aircraft or something, this is not light. None of these are terribly light where you want to get hit in the back of the head with one. So make sure that it's always, always, always secured in the aircraft. So now let's talk a little bit about use of the system. First thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about our systems checks, right? So know how to use your system before you need to use it. Not only you as the pilot, but make sure your passengers know how to use it. So this is, for those of you who are familiar with Baron pilot, he's got a Baron. He flies with his girlfriend co-pilot. They were up at 10,000 feet, and they actually had an AirOx system in the back that they had just bought from us, but it was still in the packaging. It was they hadn't taken any of it out, and they were at 10 or 11,000 feet, and she started getting hypoxic. Well, that led to a little bit of panic. She had some other stuff going on, so she starts to panic, and hypoxia, panic. My oxygen system's in the back. I don't know how to set it up. Now it went from, hey, just throw your oxygen system onto you and you'll be fine, to now he's got to deal with it. He's got to set the system up. He's got to get her calmed down. So it's a really interesting video. So just Google Baron pilot lack of oxygen causes problems, and you can see the progression over just a few minutes, how this turned into, hey, I don't feel great, to a full-on distraction and a very nerve-wracking experience for her. And what's interesting is this has gotten over, I think now close to 1.3 million views. So a lot of people have seen this, and hopefully the message is, when you buy your oxygen system, set it up on the table, lay it out, make sure you know how to use it, and brief your passengers on how to set it up without a lot of input from you. So know how your system works before you use it. Keep it clean, right? You know that oils and greases can ignite. A pure oxygen environment lowers the temperature at which things can ignite. You want to perform a pre-flight check. We use the mnemonic price. Pressure, make sure you've got enough pressure. Pressure and volume are related, right? So the more pressure, the more oxygen you have. So make sure you have enough to complete the flight. Your regulator, make sure your couplings are secure. Make sure they're not broken off. Your indicator, make sure when you turn the system on that your bulb moves up and down, or whatever you have for a flow indicator is operating. Make sure all your connections are secure. Make sure your passengers know how to use it in the event of an emergency. If you have something happen up at altitude and they need, when this is true for any kind of aircraft, right? If they need to go in the cabinet and get the emergency masks out, do you brief them on it, right? Have you tried it? Have you opened up the cabin? Have you opened up that drawer? Is it binding? Do you use that to store stuff in front of? And then a lot of these systems now, your pulse oximeter, we've got transducers, they all require electricity. So make sure you have enough electricity, your batteries are full and whatnot. So I've added that last E to there for electricity. And then while you're flying, check your flow meter, make sure your oxygen is flowing. Sometimes that cannula can separate from the flow indicator, and you'll just be dumping oxygen overboard, and you're got that on, you think you're getting oxygen, but you're not. And then you check your SpO2 levels with your pulse oximeter. All right, this is the next one, refilling your cylinder. So interesting question. For those of you who listened to Ask the A&Ps, we had a customer reach out to me and say, I was filling my airplane in my hangar because I have a Cascade, and my mechanic came over and started yelling at me and said, I can't do that I need to be an A&P to fill my oxygen system. And I'm a big fan of Mike's and Colleen's and Paul's, and so I thought about it, and I said, I know about the Khalil decision, right? I know about Part 43. I know the things that I can do as a private pilot. I can service fluids, right? So why shouldn't I be able to do this? Even though filling oxygen is not specifically enumerated in Part 43. So I said, Mike, here's my interpretation of this. A customer asked me, I knew you'd kind of get a kick out of this. And he actually talked about it on Ask the A&Ps a couple of weeks ago. And so the answer is no, you do not need an A&P to fill your own installed oxygen system, but you do need to be trained. And why? Because you're dealing with highly compressed gas. There's a lot of stored energy in an oxygen cylinder when you're filling. So make sure you know what you're doing. There is a fire risk. You can Google or do a search on YouTube for oxygen fires, and there are a lot of them. So oils, residual grease, foreign particles, all can cause ignition. So on the lower right is the oxygen port for the Piper matrix. When you put the fill port on that and you've got that oxygen flowing into the cylinder, that oxygen is flowing very fast, and any little particle is going to generate a lot of friction. That friction can cause ignition, and it does happen. So everything's got to be clean. Use tools that are separate from the tools that you use to change the oil on the airframe or on your airplane. So make sure they're cleaned with alcohol. Use PPE, safety glasses, and even though your A&P may tell you that he's the only one that can, or she's the only one that can fill your oxygen system, ask them for some training so that you do it safely. One of the things is to fill the oxygen system, whether it's portable or installed, slowly to avoid excessive heat. We recommend 200 PSI per minute. So a 2000 PSI system should take about 10 minutes to fill. And why is that? PV equals nRT. That's my one equation, right? Pressure and temperature from the ideal gas law are related to each other. So as pressure goes up, temperature goes up. That temperature, as it's going up, has to go somewhere. It radiates off of the cylinder, or heat transfers to the ambient air. If you fill it too fast, then that heat won't be able to transfer fast enough, and that cylinder will get very, very, very hot to the touch. There's generally two types of fittings. One is a PB3, which is what you see on that picture in the lower right. You can also use a Scott fitting, which is a little bit bigger. That's typically used on older systems. I guess it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it. Don't drop anything. Don't drop your cylinder. Make sure that the filling cylinders that you're filling from are secured. And then what oxygen do I use? If you're filling an installed system, I strongly recommend aviators breathing oxygen. It's in your airworthiness limitations. It's in your instructions for continued airworthiness. If you're filling a portable, all oxygen is produced using the same process. So welders oxygen, medical oxygen, and aviators breathing oxygen, they're all produced using a cryogenic process. That's what that thing there is in the lower middle portion of the screen. So you know, no matter what you use, you're going to get pure, clean oxygen that meets the highest standards. It's just certified to different levels. So this is what a cascade looks like. So when we recommend to people to set up a 2-cylinder, a 3-cylinder cascade in their hangar, the reason is that if you can fill from a single cylinder, right? But what happens is that cylinder is a 3,000 psi cylinder. As you use that oxygen, the cylinder pressure is going to go down. And as it goes down, you're only any gas seeks its own level, right? So you're only going to be able to fill your portable or your installed system to whatever's in that one cylinder. So if it's down to 1,000 psi, that's all you can fill to. Now you're going to take that 1,000 psi cylinder, you're going to send it back to the gas company. They're going to replace it with a new one. You're going to waste a lot of gas. So that's why we cascade these cylinders. And the way that the cylinder cascade works is, you see, I've got number 1 lowest. That's my lowest cylinder. That may be 600, 700 psi, all the way through to number 5, which is the 3,000 psi brand new cylinder. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with cylinder 1. I'm going to open up cylinder 1, and I'm going to fill my cylinder to equilibrium from cylinder 1, say 600 psi. Then I'm going to go over to I'm going to close that one. I'm going to open up cylinder 2, and I'm going to fill it now from 500 or 600 psi up to 900 psi. And I'm slowly going to walk that cylinder up through the various cylinders, and it's called a cascade because you're cascading through those cylinders. When cylinder 1 is empty, you remove that one. You're going to send that back to the gas company to exchange it. You'll get a new one from them. So cylinder 1 now is full. So cylinder 1 is full. Cylinder 2 becomes your next one. 3 becomes your next one. 4 becomes your next one. And 5 becomes your low cylinder. So you're just continuously walking through those cylinders. Actually, 2 becomes your low cylinder. I'm sorry. 2 becomes your low cylinder. 5 becomes your middle cylinder, and 1 becomes your highest cylinder. Couple safety things here that you see the safety chain. Make sure that if you do set up any kind of fill station in your hangar, that you either have safety chain or a stand to secure your cylinders. Don't leave them unsecured. Your hangar keeper will not like that at all. But they shouldn't have an issue with having oxygen in the hangar. 2 cylinders completely should be allowed by just about any hangar operator. This is what a fill station looks like. There's a regulator, bleed valve, a couple of filling adapters. This here, let's see if I can do my marking. So this is a PB3 filler here. That's what it looks like. And then this is the Scott filler. So you can see it's a little bit bigger. Then there's a CGA 540. This will go onto one of the cylinders from your gas company. This will go onto the other cylinder. This is a 2-cylinder cascade. And then this is where you're going to fill 2. You're either going to plug your cylinder into this, or you'll use one of these adapters to fill it into your aircraft. Pretty straightforward, pretty easy to use. All right, so summary. Oxygen system is the ultimate low-cost bolt-on mod for your aircraft, right? Where else can you spend, somewhere between $400 and $1,000 and get higher true airspeed because you're flying higher, you feel better, and if you live down here in Florida, it's way cooler up there than it is down here on the ground. And 91-211 will not keep you safe. So don't depend on the regulation to keep you safe. Understand what your own body does. Hypoxia is going to affect each person differently. Set your own personal minimums. Trust me, there is no glory. Nobody's going to buy you a drink at the bar because you think you can fly at 15,000 feet without using oxygen. Use it early, use it often. You feel better. Why wouldn't you just do it? 2 people receiving the same oxygen flow will have different SpO2s. Everybody's going to react differently to oxygen flow at any given time. If your SpO2 is below 90%, 92%, make sure you get on the oxygen no matter what the altitude is. It's easy to install, easy to maintain. The flows that we provide are a starting point. and it just enhances safety and comfort for everybody. It's great stuff. I'm just gonna take a moment of your time. I want to talk about something I'm very passionate about, which is volunteer flying. If any of you, I know Piper pilots are particularly generous and using their aircraft for volunteer flying. I'm on the board of PAL Skyhope. I'm a volunteer pilot for them down here in Florida. So if any of you ever have a question about volunteer flying, feel free to reach out to me. It is a great organization, and it's probably one of the greatest things that you can do with your aircraft is to help other people. And then for more information, here's our contact information. And all right, Mike, I think it's quiz time.
All right, Scott, thank you so much. It was incredibly informative. I learned a lot myself, and hope our attendees did as well. Before we flip over to the quiz, actually have two questions that came in. Hopefully, we'll be able to answer them pretty quickly. First is, I currently use a pulse air type system connected to my cylinder that pushes oxygen only when I'm breathing in. It was sold to the questioner as a money saver. He still can't get his SpO2 into the 90s. He assumes that he'll need to ditch that system and go directly to a connector that allows him to manually turn up continuous airflow, or is there a setting on the system that he has to make that adjustment to continuous?
So here's the thing about those, right? Is that the whole idea of them is to conserve oxygen, but the reality is your brain needs a certain amount of oxygen. So it defeats the purpose of having that conserver if you're just going to turn it up to a higher flow. So, I probably would get something where you can adjust the flow manually, like with a needle valve, or something like that. You're just physiologically, you're probably just going to need more oxygen than what a pulse demand system can provide.
Yeah. And a couple more came in looking for a monitor that continuously shows my current SpO2 level. This questioner has a Garmin watch similar to what you showed, but he doesn't think it has an O2 option like that. If he's going to be buying a new watch today, which one should he be looking at?
So there are a couple of great options. I have a Garmin. It's like a Fitbit, so it's not a watch. Because I'm old school. I like mechanical watches, but I have a Fitbit that I use to track all the time. So that's what I would look for, like a fitness watch or a fitness device instead of a watch. Because what's going to happen with the watch is it does drain the battery. So you kind of want to have a separate device. So that's what I recommend. There's no magic to it. Everybody's got to kind of figure out what works best for them, but I prefer a separate fitness device.
Right. Thanks.
And actually, WellU does have a ring that you can wear as well. One of my guys has my ring, but you can wear, and if it goes below a certain level, it'll buzz.
Oh, that sounds pretty cool. What are your thoughts on oxygen concentrators like Inogen?
So there are people who swear by them. There are people who, I was just talking to somebody last night who think they're expensive. If you look at the maintenance requirements on them, I think they've got to be refurbished every year, every 2 years. And the problem with an oxygen concentrator is that you're pulling nitrogen out of the air, right? So as you go up in altitude, by definition, that concentrator is going to be less effective because there's just less air molecules to scrub there's fewer nitrogen air molecules to scrub. Requires power and whatnot. So it's just it's a different way to solve the same problem. But I think for the environments that we're in, gaseous is definitely the way to go.
Sounds good. And now it's time to launch the quiz.
Good questions.
Yeah. Hopefully everybody can see that. And People are answering the questions, just they're still coming in, so I'll just give it a few more moments.
And if anyone comes down to the Naples area, feel free to ping me. We'll go to Mickle Bob's across the street from the airport for lunch. You show me your airplane, take me for a ride.
All right, so I'll keep the questions open, but Scott, if you want to go ahead and start walking through the answers, that would be great.
All right. All right, so for the first one, what is the acronym for checking out my oxygen system before flight? So we're familiar with all of those, right? Except for E. Gumps, cigar, I'm safe, right? Those are other pre-flight mnemonics, but it's price. All right, so pressure, regulator, et cetera, et cetera. So price, A is the right answer. And let's see here. Through this. So these are all symptoms of either hypoxia, carbon monoxide poisoning, or both. Remember, we talked about how some of these can actually be symptoms of both. So high SpO2 is carbon monoxide poisoning. And remember, that's because the pulse oximeter is tricked into seeing that oxygen atom on the CO molecule and thinks that it's oxygen, and so it's going to read high SpO2. Nausea is both. Confusion is both. Bluish skin is going to be hypoxia, and that's because obviously you don't have enough oxygen in the bloodstream. Low SpO2 is going to be hypoxia. So if high SpO2 is CO poisoning, low SpO2 has got to be hypoxia. Headache is both, and rapid heartbeat is both. And then finally, hopefully this one was a gimme. What's the cabin altitude of the M600 at flight level 280? I actually asked a friend of mine who's in training right now, so hopefully he's got the right answer. It's not 28,000 feet unless you guys are having a really, really bad day. It's not sea level. I'm not sure the cabin would stand that. 9,400 feet is the right answer. Hopefully everybody got that or got close to that. And that was actually in the presentation. So we gave everybody the answer for that one.
That's great. Thank you very much. And if you weren't able to access the quiz, but you hung on this far, you are still eligible for wings credit. Please just send me an email to mnichols, that's MNICHOLS, at PMOPA.com, and give me the email address that is associated with your wings account, and we'll add you to the roster when we submit that over to the FAA. Scott, thank you again. Very informative webinar. Greatly appreciated. It's an important topic for folks, and look forward to seeing you again at an aviation event sometime in the near future.
And you will, Mike. Thanks so much for having me, and I hope everybody's enjoyed it. And if you have any questions to follow up, feel free to email me, scott@aerox.com. I'm super easy to find.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks. Bye-bye.